Yeah. Hi, everyone. Does that sound okay? Great. We're gonna go ahead and get started. We have about an hour-long program for you tonight. My name is Morgan. I'm the executive director of the museum, for those I don't know. And I just want to say welcome. I'm seeing a lot of new faces in the audience, so that's always really great to see. And I especially want to thank our members and donors of the museum who make our educational programming and bringing really great speakers here possible. So thank you if you're a museum member or supporter. And I also want to give a big thank you to Steve Kemp, our author and presenter tonight, who made his way out here to Wyoming and is here to share his recent research and book that is obviously so relevant to this place, to Grand Teton National Park, as well as many other parks. So we feel lucky to host you tonight. A little bit more about Steve. I was pleasantly surprised to hear a bit about his background and connection to Jackson Hole and the Tetons. It's very similar to mine. We both got our start at Signal Mountain Lodge. So Steve first spent most of his adult life working in national parks, from cook at Signal Mountain Lodge in Grand Teton to a seasonal ranger in Yellowstone and Denali to publications director for nonprofit park education partner Great Smoky Mountains Association, which is now called Smoky's Life. He is a graduate of the University of Montana's writing program and has written for magazines including National Parks, Outside, Outdoor Life, and Smoky's Life Journal. He is the author of several books, including Trees of the Smokies, Great Smoky Mountains, Simply Beautiful, The Blue Ridge Parkway, a celebration of the American landscape, and the children's book, We're Going to the Mountains. And this morning, Steve was kind enough to do a program for about 70 local kindergartners. So that was pretty fun to be able to bring someone here to do both a kids program and an adult program. Was it fun?
They were my emotional age.
And as I said, it's like, oh, these are fresh kindergartners, right? They just started school. And they were glued, they had their attention glued to Steve. So no pressure, but hopefully we can engage us as well. So again, tonight Steve is here to give a presentation, and then we'll have some time for questions from the audience. And we're also selling his newly released book down in the bookstore. So if you want to head down there after the program to buy yourself a copy, and I'm sure he would sign it as well. So thank you all for being here. Hopefully it stays warm enough. Thank you for bringing your tickets today.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, thank you all for coming, great crowd. Thanks to History Jackson Hole, all these great folks. This is my book. Does the title remind anybody of another book title? An Exaltation of Parks. It rhymes with another book's title. See, so I thought it'd be clever by rhyming my book with another book's title. So far in 4 programs, only 2 people have ever heard of that other book, which is called An Exaltation of Parks. And it's a great book if you've never seen it. It's all about very poetic names for different groups of animals and people. For instance, do you know what a group of crows is called? Murder. Murder, very good. Okay, let's step it up. For 10 points, how about a group of ravens? And unkindness, very good, very good. Step it up again, 20 points, a group of eagles. Tough one. A convocation of eagles. How about a group of swallows? A swoop of swallows. And since you're all here for a program about a book, what would you call a group of readers?
A lot of people.
A lot of people, great people, my kind of people, are a browse of readers. So people always ask, what inspired you to write this book? And the number one thing is because I'm from Iowa. And it's a nice enough place, but there's not a lot of public lands, especially for an outdoorsy kid like me who loved to hunt and fish and hike and camp and backpack. And every time we tried to go someplace, we ran into like no trespassing signs and barbed wire fences. It's not all like paradise here, you know, there's other places in the world that aren't half as nice. So, and it gets kind of boring hiking through soybean fields after a while too. So as soon as I could, I headed out west, worked at Single Mountain Lodge, with Ted back there, yeah. Cook, dishwasher. I think I was promoted to dishwasher for half the season. Worked in Yellowstone as a seasonal ranger, worked in Denali, Great Smoky Mountains. And if you if you see the asterisks there, 3 of those 4 parks were John D. Rockefeller Jr. parks. He played a large role in 3 of those parks. And if you're wondering why the baby's so terrified, that's actually Ted's oldest son there. And do you know why he was so terrified?
Your uniform.
Most kids think I'm a nice guy. But I also met my wonderful wife in a national park in Great Smoky Mountains. We got married in an old growth grove of trees in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, probably saved by John D. Rockefeller Jr., whom I'll just refer to as Junior in the family tradition from now on. We honeymooned in Acadia, another Rockefeller Park. We rode on Junior's precious carriage roads. So the longer I worked in these Rockefeller Parks, the more I learned about Junior, the more I started to appreciate what he'd done for the National Park Service system in general, and for myself in particular. And I also learned about these great partnerships he became part of, these collaborations between the National Park Service and grassroots citizens organizations. And they were so effective. They functioned so well, so productive. And I thought, well, maybe the same partnerships could address some of our current national park crises. And there's quite a few. I know in the Great Smoky Mountains, we have a lot of people. Luckily, you don't have any crowding in Grand Teton or Yellowstone, do you? No, it's still wide open spaces. Yeah, overcrowding. I don't hear a lot of talking about it, but it impacts me. I volunteer in the park, the visitor center where I work. Sometimes the parking lot for the visitor center is full before the visitor center opens. We have to tell people all day, well, if you want to hike that trail, you need to get there before 6:30 in the morning or after 4:30 in the afternoon. It's really, really crowded. And it's too bad because it just adds frustration, which should be enjoyment. 332 million visitors last year, up 6 million in just 1 year. Parks are being overrun, they're overused a lot. You have to have a reservation now to enter the park. You have to have a timed entry to enter the park, which adds to that frustration. And though it's great for people who get a reservation into like Glacier or Rocky Mountain, there's a lot of people who don't get the reservation, so who don't get to enjoy it the way we did in our youth, where you just kind of drove through the gate and there you were. Visits are going up, staffing's going down 25% since 2010, and this is before 2025. Why are we cutting staffing? National parks cost something, but we're a pretty wealthy nation too. Through 2024, national parks consumed, all 400 national parks consumed less than 1/15 of the federal budget. 1/15 of 1% of the federal budget. Not much. Money well spent, if you ask me. So on to the heart of our story, John D. Rockefeller Sr., the wealthiest of the Gilded Age tycoons, not at all what you'd expect from a Gilded Age tycoon. Very religious person, a teetotaler, very thrifty, never spent any money on extravagance. Had a couple nice homes, but his kids kind of made him do that. We also forget often that he got rich not off gasoline for cars, but kerosene for lanterns. So in the evolutionary history of humankind, the invention of kerosene made from crude oil was a giant leap forward because people could do things after dark. People could work after dark, they could read after dark. So he was a very devout Christian, the whole family was Northern Baptists. His son was very different, very shy, awkward, prone to depression, also very religious, lifetime teetotaler, just devoted to duty his whole life. Didn't have to be devoted to duty his whole life. He was the richest guy in the world. Could have done anything he wanted to do. But what did he decide to do with his time? He just worked his butt off every day, all day, working on these projects. For the mission of Rockefeller philanthropy was very simple. It was just for the good of humankind. Very broad too. The family happy place was actually in Ohio. They started out at Forest Hill, 700 acres, big sprawling, beautiful hills, some old growth forest, a view of the lake. The father and son bonded by building carriage roads together. This was just at the beginning of the time when people were doing landscape architecture as a semi-profession. It was the country estate period when, you know, all the zillionaires had country estates. And that's how they bonded, was building these really carefully designed carriage roads. Not just to get from point A to point B, but to enjoy the scenery, to conform to the scenery, to provide certain views and looks at meadows and beautiful bridges over the ravines, over the streams. And luckily for Junior, he married a really great woman, Abby Rockefeller. The yeast in the Rockefeller bread, whereas the Rockefeller family was pretty reticent and subdued and maybe even dour. Abby was the opposite. She was an extrovert. She was charming. She was witty. Some people called her the first lady of America. Everybody loved Abby. She was very much into arts as well as conservation. And she and some other people started the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And they had six healthy children. They were all very purposeful children. The middle one, Nelson Rockefeller, who became vice president of the US, he had a whole lot to do with the Rockefeller involvement in conservation, just by chance. Because Abby was pregnant with Nelson in 1908. She was due to give birth in the summertime. And her physician, Dr. Thomas, announced that, well, good luck with the delivery. I'm headed to Maine for the summer. And of course, they were Rockefellers, so they could have worked something out. But Abby and Junior really weren't that kind of people at all. They announced and said instead that, well, I guess we're going to Maine also. So they went to Maine, Mount Desert Island. But at that time, it was the Gilded Age Zillionaires retreat, kind of like Newport, Rhode Island, or the Hamptons, J.P. Morgan, Sears, Kennedy's, everybody there, yachts. Kind of a lot of cavorting, drinking, partying, dancing, which wasn't the Rockefeller speed. So they went from Bar Harbor to Seal Harbor, and we're lucky enough to find a cozy little cottage there. The Airy. As soon as Junior got there, he started adding more and more land, building those carriage roads. Love those carriage roads. Abby got busy redecorating the house, beautiful furnishings. If you've ever seen photographs of the inside, just incredible art and a lot of Asian pieces. But as time went on, Mount Desert Island started getting too busy. Can you imagine that? Even in the early 1900s, they were getting too busy. People were building summer homes all over the place, you know, and in the wrong kinds of places, right on the lake shore, right on the seashore. And there's also a logging boom that was having impacts on the park. So grassroots citizens group got together, the Hancock County Trustees for Public Reservations, group of ordinary citizens. They started buying up land, taking donations of land. They amassed 3,000 acres, which was great. They're also protecting watersheds. Their leaders were an eccentric bachelor named George B. Dorr, who was a Boston Brahmin from a very wealthy family. until George spent all the money on this preserve, in Mount Desert Island. Spent all the money he had on buying land for this preserve, and then he went into debt so he could help buy more. And Charles Eliot was the other co-captain. He was the president of Harvard. Knew he had a lot of connections, could make things happen. They had amassed this 3,000 acres, and it was, it was a type of trust, a legal trust with the state. But as time went on, the developers and the loggers started chipping away at the legality of the preserve. And George and Charles were quite panicked because they spent decades putting this thing together, all their money, and they realized, somebody might just say, "Oh, this charter is not legal. It's going to be dissolved, and all the land will go back on the market." So they decided that George B. Dorr would go to Washington, and they were going to try to make their little preserve a national park. They're 3,000 acres. So Dorr gathered up his deeds and his maps and his spreadsheets and headed to Washington, D.C. Headed to Washington, D.C. in 1914, looking for the National Park Service office. And he couldn't find it. Does anybody know why he couldn't find the National Park Service office in 1914? It didn't exist? Yeah. Didn't exist until 1916. So he ran all around Washington, D.C., finally found Horace Albright, who tried to help him out. He suggested that he pushed for a national monument with the president. That was with the 1906 Antiquities Act, so the president can create a national monument and bypass Congress. Relatively simple method. But Albright also said, "But you've got some problems with your land here. We're going to have to verify the deeds back to the 18th century. Your boundaries don't look right. You've got a lot of inholdings inside. You have to buy more land. You have to hire a bunch of lawyers to verify all these deeds." And so Dorr came back to Maine and talked to Eliot and said, "Man, what are we going to do? This is going to cost a fortune, and I'm tapped out." So what did they do? Who are you going to call in a situation like that? They're going to call John D. Rockefeller Jr., of course, who lived just down the shoreline. But Junior's first reaction was actually, "Why would we do that?" They had this cozy little millionaires, neighborhood, very private. They had complete control over everything. Junior had his miles and miles of carriage roads that he could build exactly the way he wanted to. And here's Dorr and Eliot saying, "Yeah, no, we want to turn this into a national park. We want all these tourists to come. We want them to come in their automobiles." Junior hated automobiles. Absolutely. They weren't even allowed on Mount Desert Island, in the area, Seal Harbor area, where they lived at the time. But, Eliot and Dorr worked on him. They talked to him. And they also had a little bit of leverage. And they said, "Junior, think about it. This new park, think how many more carriage roads we'll need." So he was enticed that way. But he also made the major transition in his conservation career. And that is, he went from being a gazillionaire who just wanted privacy on this beautiful paradise in Maine to somebody who was following the family mission for the benefit of mankind and doing things that would help other people. So he started thinking, well, I always had those nice estates when I was young. And he had 2 catastrophic nervous breakdowns before he even got out of high school. And whenever he did that, he always retreated to these estates and did manual labor, cut firewood, planted trees, built carriage roads, gradually recovered just from spending time in nature. So he began to think, maybe other people need that. Maybe other people need the physical and spiritual and mental rejuvenation that nature provides. And he was also getting pushback from the townspeople too. They're like, "Oh, you millionaires, you got your cute little carriage roads, you go trotting along, and your cute little carriages, and oh, that must be so nice." But when Aunt Ida comes to visit us, we don't have 3 days to trot around the island and show her the sights. We want to go up to Cadillac Mountain drive up there, have a picnic, and show her the sights, and then drive home and have supper at home. So Junior started seeing that side too. People were starting to call him, oh, you're kind of an elitist with your carriage road. So he actually started building really expensive motor roads, big, beautiful, expensive motor roads that are still there today. Just an amazing transition. And not only are they beautiful roads, I mean, he went to the ends of the earth to make them beautiful. I mentioned before he was a perfectionist. He one of his hurdles in building Ocean Drive in Acadia National Park was that there's a naval listening station out on a peninsula out there. And of course, he could have rerouted the road around it, but he was a perfectionist. So he decided that he was going to talk the Navy into moving it, which he actually did. After about 2 years and building a new naval station and building the roads and digging the wells and building these incredible like officers and enlisted men's quarters that look just like the gazillionaires' mansions elsewhere on the island. So finally, they moved the listening station to an even better place. And Junior, throughout his entire career, he always helped Acadia in a million different ways. The family's still there. Now we're going to backtrack a little bit to 1923, the Great Smoky Mountains. Ann and Willis Davis, they're from an industrialist family in Knoxville, Tennessee. They went out to Yellowstone National Park. Rode out by train, went around in the coaches and had it in the touring cars. Robert Ryder's here, so he's making me really nervous because he knows everything. So I'm going to try to be as accurate as possible as I can. So yeah, they're in the touring cars and going around Yellowstone. But on the way back, Anne has this epiphany. She said, Yellowstone was great. I liked it. It's okay. But our Great Smoky Mountains are just as nice. Why can't we have a national park in the Great Smoky Mountains? Of course, when she and Willis were thinking of a national park in the Great Smoky Mountains, they weren't thinking so much of preserving animals and trees and things. They were thinking of a tourist attraction and economic development for this poor southern Appalachian city of Knoxville. Also got Ted Catton in the audience, who wrote the administrative history of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Jeez, the pressure is on. So that they became evangelical. Anne ran for the state legislature, who became the third woman elected to the state legislature. And her primary purpose was to push through this Great Smoky Mountains National Park. City of Knoxville was right behind. This is the 1920s, medium-sized town. Americans, we can do it. George Babbitt, and all that kind of thing. But they're mostly thinking of, this goose that laid the golden egg, tourist attraction, hotels, restaurants, money. But there were conservationists too. There were a lot of hiking clubs that really enjoyed the Smoky Mountains. And they didn't like seeing the clear cutting that was going on. The trees was all virgin forest at the time. Beautiful hardwood trees, walnuts, oaks, hickories, just being shaved down. So it was conservationists and capitalists united. But as they started their campaign to create a national park, they found out it wasn't as easy as they had assumed. First obstacle was there were 30 other communities in the central and southern Appalachians who also wanted national parks. Isn't that amazing to think about how controversial national parks can be? There were 30 communities in the central and southern Appalachians that were begging for national parks. And the Smokies boosters had to compete with them. In fact, they found out at one point that there was a committee, the Southern Appalachian National Park Committee. They were kind of like, it was almost like a beauty pageant. They went to all these areas, these beautiful areas, and looked at them and judged them and rated them. And the Smokies boosters found out they hadn't even made the short list with the pageant. And so they were incensed, they roared off, they ambushed the committee at the Tony Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, where they were meeting. They demanded that the committee come to the Great Smokies as well. And the committee came and they liked the Smokies, and after a lot of debate, they decided to recommend Shenandoah, Great Smoky Mountains, and Mammoth Cave as the next national parks in the east to add to the national park system. So that was obstacle number one. Number two was a doozy. Every single acre of Great Smoky Mountains National Park was in private hands. Every single 500,000 acres, all of it privately owned. 1,100 farm families, and about 80% of it was owned by big timber companies. So they had to buy it all. And to do that, they needed $10 million, which is $184 million in today's money. It's a lot of money. Anybody here ever done a fundraiser? Would 184 million sound intimidating? It's a big goal, very big. They weren't intimidated. They marched right into it. Their first goal was to raise 1 million locally, 1/10 of the goal. So they went around Knoxville and area communities. They went to the schools. They got the kids to pony up 5 and 10 cents each. They went to the churches. They passed around 1 plate for the church, 1 plate for the park. They went to the hotels. They lined up the bellhops. They made them empty their pockets of all their tips they'd gotten that day. They went to the banks, the chambers of commerce. They went to everyone, and then they went again, because they're raising $1 million at that time. It took a long time. In fact, when their deadline was approaching, the city of Knoxville was still something like $30,000 short of their goal. So the governor, or the mayor, Ben Morton, just said, okay, we're shutting down Knoxville. No church, no sports, no fun, no school, no work. Nothing happens till we get that $30,000. Very quickly, they got that $30,000. So they got their $1 million. Some of it was just in pledges awaiting a match. Then they went to the states, to Tennessee and North Carolina, and got them to give $2 million each, which wasn't easy. But the only reason they did that, they said, well, you don't have to actually write us a check at the moment. You can write a pledge for your $2 million, and you don't have to pay it until we find a match. So everybody knew they weren't going to find a match for $94 million. Their plan was what they called the national campaign. Their plan was to send Major Welch back east to hit up all the gazillionaires and get money for Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He didn't get a penny, not one red cent. Fortunately, there was this guy named Johnny Rockefeller Jr. who had become good friends with Arno B. Cameron, who was the assistant director of the Park Service at the time. He was over Acadia. He'd been working with Junior on all those Acadia carriage roads because he had to approve them now that it was a national park. They were both devout Christian people. Their families became friends. Junior just melded with these Park Service leaders with just amazing ease. They loved him because he had a lot of money, but he was also humble and generous. And he had good ideas too. He also had a lot of perseverance, and he was a perfectionist. So Arno B. Cameron decided, okay, our only hope is to approach Junior. They set up, and it's a bad thing when you're doing a fundraiser, you raise half the money, right? You're not sure if you can get the other half. Like maybe you built half the building. It can be a very vulnerable time. And that's the way the Smokies work. A lot of this was still pledges. So Arno set up a meeting with Junior downtown Manhattan in the Standard Oil building there on the right. 26 Broadway, 40th floor, they meet up there. And Junior's really busy. This is the 1920s. He's got a gazillion things going on. This was the peak of his philanthropic tsunami. He was doing stuff everywhere in the world. And he was almost too busy to even entertain Arno B., the assistant director of the Park Service. He left him sitting in the waiting room for 90 minutes. finally said, well, let's talk over lunch. I've got, 15 minutes for lunch. Let's talk over there. So they sat down together, and of course, what did Junior want to talk about? Carriage roads, carriage roads, Acadia. What is it with this Junior? It's always the carriage road, always the carriage roads. And finally, at the end, Arno said, well, what about the Smokies? What about the Smokies? I sent you some information about it. What do you think about the Smokies? Yeah, I haven't really had time to think about that. Tell you what, but go home and write me a letter and give me all the details, and I'll sit down with my advisors and we'll think about it. So it all came down to Arno B. We had to write like a $94 million letter to convince Arno B to convince Junior to fork over the money. So that had to be a great letter, and fortunately, it was a great letter. It not only explains what the Park Service wanted to do in the Great Smoky Mountains, it expresses what they want to do with the National Park Service in general. The NPS had the actual knowledge of what a visit to Western parks meant to the lucky ones. That would be you. It brought to the individual and his family a breath of the outdoors and a vision of the best that God made in this country, and a realization, this is the part I like, a realization that a country that is reserving such areas and maintaining them for the benefit of its citizens was a pretty good country to live in. A pretty good country to live in. National parks have always been very patriotic, and they've always been very bipartisan too. So he wrote the letter, Junior read it, he said, oh, you had me at the best God ever created. He decided to go along with it. A few months later, one of his assistants, Kenneth Chorley showed up in Knoxville with a check for $5 million. And he said, it could only be described as the armistice. He said, people just poured out onto the street as soon as they heard that they'd raised the last $5 million for their beloved national park. And they rang all the church bells, all the train whistles, all the factory whistles for 10 minutes, nonstop. People were really happy. They were happy that they're going to have a national park in their backyard, but they're really happy that they're going to be a lot more prosperous from then on also. And it did become America's most visited national park. We have an average around 12 million visitors a year, up to 14 during COVID. 1924. Guess who comes to Yellowstone National Park? Rockefeller family. They come in, they take the train into Gardner, they come to some other national parks. They get into Gardner, and who's waiting for them there? Horace Albright, superintendent of Yellowstone, assistant director of the Park Service. He was actually a pretty productive government employee, if you can imagine there's such a thing. There's a superintendent of Yellowstone in the summer, and then the winter, since there wasn't that much to do in Yellowstone, he went to Washington, was the associate director of the National Park Service field while he was there. So he was laying in wait of the Rockefellers. He was very excited about them coming because one thing, Yellowstone had very little funding, but also that he had the dream of adding Grand Teton National Park to the national park system. In fact, he'd been infatuated with that since 1915. Now it was 1924. They hadn't made much progress, and here was the Rockefeller family coming in. So he gave them this really weird itinerary. They only had 3 or 4 days to spend in Yellowstone, and he sent them from Gardner to Mammoth, all the way south through Yellowstone, all the way out beyond Yellowstone, 20 miles to the shores of Jackson Lake, so they could get a look at the Grand Teton Mountains. Didn't mention why he was sending them. Just thought they might want to take them. Kind of impinged on their Yellowstone trip. But they went down there, they came back, and Albright was waiting there for them before they left to go on to Glacier. And he was expecting them to say, oh, those Grand Tetons, we have to add that to the national park system. They didn't say a word about the Teton, not one word. Few weeks later, though, after they got back from a 10-day horsepacking trip in Glacier, Horace Albright gets a letter from Junior with a main postscript and post stamp, and it says, thanks for arranging the trip. Really enjoyed your hospitality. Didn't say a word about the Tetons. But he did say, of course, he just driven on like 180 miles of park roads. Said, your roadsides are really crappy. He was a landscape architect. And when they had built the roads initially in Yellowstone, they just piled all the trees and boulders and debris and dirt and stuff on the side of the roads. And this was, of course, how the Park Service expected people to enjoy national parks was by road. It was this egalitarian idea that everybody could come here. You didn't have to be a gazillionaire. People who had cars could come here and drive around on their own. And Albright was a very savvy person because Junior he had visited all these parks. He made a similar offer to a couple other people, including the director of the Forest Service. And they're very defensive. Oh, no, I think that trail's fine. Yeah, no, we're working on that. No, we don't need your help. We don't need your money. I don't know how we'd even do that because we're federal government. We have, Congress gives us money. I'm not sure how, if somebody just gave us a bunch of cash. Albright wasn't like that. Albright, first thing he said is, Junior, I was just saying to the wife this morning, I wish we could improve those roadsides. We get so many complaints about how ugly our roadsides are, but we just never had the money or the time to fix it up. So Junior offers to help fund it, and they just form this great bond. They correspond weekly, huge letters, 6, 8, 10-page letters. Albright's always like sending photos and spreadsheets and dollars and cents because he's picked up Junior's this very detail-oriented person, so he just feeds right into his wheelhouse. Junior loves doing it. They make a lot of progress. 1926, the family comes back. They look at the roadsides. A lot of them have been improved already. They just look great. Junior's happy. There's wildflowers growing along the roadsides now. And of course, what does Albright want them to do? Yeah, let's not dawdle on Yellowstone here. Well, let's go south. So the whole family heads south. They go to Jackson Lake, go up to One Tree Hill. They next day they go into the valley itself. And the Rockefellers are kind of appalled. So even Abby, it's like, why are all these billboards here? You've got like the most beautiful scenery in the world. Why are all these billboards and these kind of rundown cabins, a burned out gas station, kind of sketchy dance hall? You ran the utilities between the road and the mountains, blocking the view. What were you thinking of when you did that? And then Albright sat him down. Straight view. I believe Mr. Ryder says it was Hendricks Point there, a great view of the mountains, and he waves his arm and points and talks about this grassroots citizens groups that have been getting together and talking about getting somebody to buy the valley, find some rich folks to buy the valley, and then turn it into some type of federal reserve, maybe a recreation area, maybe a national park, and how this has been going, and makes his whole pitch and looks at the Rockefellers, and not a wink, not a smile, not a nod, nothing. Till a couple weeks later, and then Junior and Albright start corresponding a little bit. So it tries to warm him up this idea of buying Jackson Hole. And they have another great meeting in Manhattan. Great meeting. Albright's headed there, and he's feeling a little bit sheepish because he's got to present this bill to Junior that's a lot bigger than what he thought it was, and a lot bigger than what he mentioned to Junior it might be. Plus he was Horace Albright, who lived in Yellowstone half the year, and probably wasn't used to being in downtown Manhattan. But this part of this meeting is so dramatic. If you'll allow us to do a short dramatization. This is in the office up on the 40th floor, overlooking Manhattan. Mr. Rockefeller, these are the 14,000 acres of land in Jackson Hole we need to purchase. By working with local realtors and bankers, we estimate the cost to be $400,000. Now, I know that's a little bit higher than we discussed earlier.
Mr. Albright, is this all there is?
Yes, this is the property we have been working on.
No, this isn't what I had in mind at all. You took us all that afternoon to a hill where we looked out over the mountains and the whole valley. I remember you used the word dream. That's the area for which I wanted you to get cost estimates. The family is only interested. The family is only interested in an ideal project. And it would please me very much if you could get me data on that.
What? Mr. Rockefeller, that might cost as much as $1.5 million or $2 million to buy all that land.
Well, of course, but that is what I'm interested in. I'm only interested in the ideal proposition. I would like to know about the land on both sides of the river and to the north.
Thank you. So that probably doesn't happen very much when you're fundraising, does it? I'd like $1 million. No, I'll give you $2 million. Very much the perfectionist. So Albright went back to here and met with his realtors and the grassroots citizens group and got some more estimates and took it to Junior, and Junior looked it all over and just said, we'll do it. They formed the Snake River Land Company, started buying up land in 1927. They bought up a lot pretty quickly. There were a lot of ranchers that were struggling, since you may not have noticed, it's kind of a cold place in the winter, short growing season, and you have to feed cattle a lot. There were other people though who weren't very enthusiastic about the national park at all. There was Mrs. Geraldine Lucas from my home state of Iowa. She was a widow living out in Lupin Meadows area. She really liked it there because she was from Iowa and she was living in Lupin Meadows. So she told Harold Fabian, one of the the attorneys over the land buying effort for Snake River Land Company, that Mr. Fabian, you come back here and you stack those silver dollars as high as the Grand Teton Mountains, and then we'll talk about buying my land. But a few years later, she did die, and she gave the land to her son. And through another intermediate step, we do have Lupin Meadows, which we're very happy to have. As time went on, rumors started spreading around the valley who the Snake River Land Company was. It was a shell company. They wanted people to believe it was like a cattle company or a hunting preserve or something like that. But then when they found out it was the National Park Service and an Eastern millionaire, it just increased their resistance. Then 1933, Horace Albright quit the National Park Service. He was a brilliant man, one of the best people the Park Service ever had. But his intention in life had always been to be an attorney and live in California and work on land rights issues. And the government job was killing him. It was literally killing him. All these guys just worked all the time. There's a story about Arnold B. Camera once. He wrote a letter to one of the Rockefeller lieutenants and said he worked all the way through Tuesday. He worked all the way through Tuesday night. It's Wednesday now, 6 o'clock, and he's hoping to go home. Just incredible commitment to the cause of the early days of the National Park Service. But Albright quits, and there's a congressional investigation to investigate coercion in buying land by the Snake River Land Company. Coercing, forcing people to sell their land. Congressional committee came in August, of course, because you've been in Washington, D.C. in August. Yeah, you're thinking of Jackson Hole, yeah. So they came here, didn't really find much, a couple minor infractions, which were regrettable, but, no big, issues of coercion, and they concluded that people were being paid fairly or better for their land. Why was there so much opposition? Well, you live here, you know. Of course you'd be opposed. This Jackson Hole is beautiful. You love being a cowboy. The US Forest Service was very much against it, always bickering with the Park Service because a lot of national parks were created from Forest Service lands. They were really, they had already created the 1929 Grand Teton National Park, the small park, just mostly the vertical part that didn't include Jackson Lake or didn't protect the shorelines of Jenny Lake and String Lake. But it had been created out of Forest Service property and it was now a national park. It was pretty nice. It just didn't have Jackson Hole. Of course, you know, Westerners, some of them just distrust our federal government for some reason. And there were some, you know, important tax issues that if it became all federal land, this was talking about 35,000 acres in the valley becoming federal lands, you lose all that revenue from all those ranches, pay for your schools and things like that. That was a real thorn in the effort for a long time. But I think the person who described the opposition best was Robert W. Wright. Man has always had a possessory inclination toward a particular piece of land, or even a whole mountain valley. And perhaps the greater the beauty, the more determined the attachment becomes. When I read that, it was like, that is brilliant. But it wasn't all opposition either. There was a lot of people in favor of the park as well. The Muries, Olas wrote a great article for National Parks magazine, made the point, it is our government. It is our National Park Service. We have asked them to care for something precious that belongs to all of us. It should be our ambition to assist all agencies to keep intact this one segment of America that we boast of as the last of the old West. He had a good point too. There weren't good guys and bad guys. They just had different perspectives. And if you're from Iowa, you really like the fact that this became a national park. And you could come out here at 18 years old and just run amok in Grand Teton and Yellowstone. Time went on, another 10 years. 1943, still no Grand Teton National Park. Junior's a patient man, but his patience was growing thin. So he wrote the Secretary of Interior, probably worked with Albright on it, wrote this letter to the Secretary of Interior and basically said, you know, take it or leave it. If you don't accept my 35,000 acres, I'm going to sell it. That's that. Some people say he was bluffing, some people say he wasn't. There's evidence on both sides. I kind of think he actually did the same thing in Acadia, when there was a lot of opposition to a big road he was building, a big motor road. And a lot of the gazillionaires didn't want a big motor road and lots of tourists. So they fought him tooth and nails. He said, okay, I won't do it. And everybody said, oh, yes, you will. We need that road. It's depression. We need the jobs. We need the roads. We need the tourism. And so I think he was hoping something similar would happen. And FDR created Grand Teton National Monument using the 1906 Antiquities Act, just with one stroke of the pen, didn't have to go through Congress, created the National Monument. Oh boy, then things got really hot, really hot. People didn't like, you know, going around Congress, going right to the president, creating this national monument. The opposition came up with one of the most brilliant PR things of all times. And that was the Wallace Beery cattle drive. Wallace Beery was the highest paid actor in Hollywood at the time. He owned some land on Jackson Lake. He was in a lot of westerns, some of them filmed in Jackson Hole. They got him to get together some of his stockman buddies, and while the cameras clicked and the reporters wrote, they drove several hundred cattle right through the heart of the new national monument, taunting them to come arrest them. And America, whose side did America come to? Yeah, gotta love cowboys, right? I mean, they got the cool horses, they got the cool hats, they got the 6-shooters, they have this romantic lifestyle, they live, eat around the campfire. It's just, America's always loved campfires and cowboys, and they just sided with the opposition, and Junior more gnashing of teeth, more years of gnashing of teeth, owning all this land, paying all the taxes on it, fortune in taxes, fixing up the buildings, keeping the some of the hotels running, and then the Wyoming elected officials even started coming after the Antiquities Act. They kept on blocking the national monument from actually going into place, and they went after the Antiquities Act, and the Congress was changing, and it was a dark day there in 1943. Fortunately, after World War II, things changed some more. A lot of conservation groups began forming across America. People started traveling again. There was no more gas rationing. There was rubber for their tires. The economy was booming. People had been cooped up during the dismal years of the Second World War. They were traveling. They were coming to Yellowstone. They were coming to the Tetons. They were spending money. People in Jackson were making money. Their bank accounts were going up. Land prices were going up. And gradually people started saying, yeah, raising cows is hard work. This tourist stuff seems a lot easier, seems a lot more lucrative. Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. And pretty soon the elected officials started saying, yeah, maybe this national monument thing wasn't such a horrible idea. Another contributor was the restoration of Meaner's Ferry. When Lawrence and Junior owned all this land in Jackson Hole, they kind of managed it like a national park. They had it for 24 years. 24 years they had ownership of this land, and they took really good care of it. And part of what they did was they did a historic building inventory. And one of the buildings they inventoried was Meaner's Ferry. And they started the restoration, and Harold and Josephine Fabian headed it up. Lawrence paid for it, and they did it the right way. They talked to all the old timers. They invited them to come in and tell their stories, bring in their photographs, tell them what the ferry meant to them in the days it was operating, because it had become run down. And the Fabians and people started recognizing Lawrence, just how popular this issue was. They had a big deal, grand opening. They had the governor come. They had the leader of the LDS church come. They had all these reporters, and the first ferry load that went across was like the oldest of the old timers, and reporters reported there were tears running down their eyes. And just had pleasant memories of hanging out at the ferry, waiting their turn, meeting their neighbors, going to town. It was really a sentimental thing. And people said after that they even said, well, to the Pro Park people, well, we didn't know that you cared about people. We thought all you wanted was your damn park. So the sides started coming together, almost like the end of a college football game, very, very peaceably. And then there were a lot of compromises that were made. A lot of dude ranches went on being dude ranches. Some cattle ranches went on being cattle ranches. People, once they stopped fighting, some really great things started happening. But that's just a sliver of Junior's contribution to the National Park System. He also helped Mesa Verde. He bought thousands of acres in the Redwood Forest. He was the biggest contributor to Shenandoah National Park. He saved 11,000 acres of old growth sugar pine forests in Yosemite. He added 1,100 acres to the Blue Ridge Parkway, probably the most beautiful section, Linville Falls, and Gorge and the Blue Ridge Parkway. Created park museums. He created a museum in the Grand Canyon, the big open air one, the Yosemite Museum, all the trailside museums in Yellowstone, the ones that are still there except for Old Faithful. He funded those, and it just goes on and on. Of course, Lawrence Jr. built Jackson Lake Lodge in Coulter Bay. Of course, some people say, oh, there he goes, building a big lodge. Now he's gonna cash in on all this money he's given. But somebody else pointed out, who else is gonna pay $65 million in today's dollars for a hotel that's open 3 months a year? And anybody with their hands up? Yeah. Who wants to do that? They went on to, Lawrence created Virgin Islands National Park, the final Teton's gift in 2007, where Lawrence Rockefeller gave the last 1,100 acres back to the park, much to his family's dismay. I've talked to at least one family member, and it was not popular. They loved their old JY Ranch there on Phelps Lake, and they went there to get engaged. They went there for their anniversaries. They brought their grandchildren there. That was the favorite place in the world. Of course it was. You have been there? Yeah, you've been there. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. They had it all to themselves. Great family retreat. Wouldn't your family like to have that retreat? Lawrence felt that his father wanted that, and he felt that his father and Horace Albright had agreed on that when they let him have, it started out as 3,000 acres of the JY Ranch by Phelps Lake, and gradually Lawrence gave it away till 2000. Of course, Lawrence was about ready to die at the time too, so made it easier for him to make that gift. But the family, if it had been up to the family to vote on giving that last 1,100 acres to us so that we could all go there, it would have been a hard no. So in conclusion, Junior spent over $800 million in 2025 dollars on the parks. But more importantly, he proved how effective these partnerships were and how effective they could be again. Because again, national parks are bipartisan issues. They always have been. The recent Land and Water Conservation Act was pushed through Congress by Lamar Alexander, our great Republican senator in Tennessee. And why do I like national parks? And why do I think we should expand our national parks? Why do I think we should take good care of our national parks? For one thing, as we learned tonight, they make economic sense. Most national parks were created to boost the economy, and boy, have they. I mean, how many things work out that well? They say for every dollar spent in a national park, it returns $10 to $15. Generates over $50 billion in revenue. It used to cost $3 billion, according to future budget projections. Now it's only going to cost $2 billion, and supports hundreds of thousands of jobs. Not even more importantly, biological benefits. My home park, Great Smoky Mountains, we protect 70,000 species of plants and animals. 70,000 native species of plants and animals in our park. That's worth having a national park with nothing else. They're great carbon sinks. They all day long, they breathe in carbon and exhale oxygen. My wife, who's a botanist, is kind of, it's not exactly like that, Steve. Just keeping it short. They're great for people, of course. That's why they're so popular. They make us happy. They make us healthy. Sometimes we don't appreciate how they bring people together. I know the Sugarlands Visitor Center where I work, a lot of days it looks like the United Nations. There's people from 20 different religions in the visitor center at the same time. Probably for, here, there's people probably from at least 10 different countries in any visitor center at any given time. And 332 million people can't be all that. And we've got a beautiful country. We're scenery rich. Look at the Rocky Mountains, how vast the Rocky Mountains are. Look how small Rocky Mountain National Park is. What was that about? Look at New England. Look at the Cascades. Look at the Sierra Nevadas. Look at the Appalachians. We have a lot of space, and we know national parks are a good idea. So I am pro parks. And a lot of other people are too, you know, it didn't end with Junior and Albright. Teton Woods and Water National Monument in Maine was created by Roxanne Quimby, the Burt's Bees woman. Started out rags to riches story, started out hawking honey on the side of the road, became a gazillionaire, didn't really have any reason to spend her money on much. So she decided to buy this land and create a park, again, mostly for economic development, because that part of Maine is very economically challenged. It's also very beautiful. What do? Create a park. She did that. Kelly Parcel, you guys know about that. Square Mile in Grand Teton National Park. The government came together with that Land and Water Conservation Act. The Teton Foundation raised an incredible amount of money. In the Smokies, we have purchased Knob. That's 530 acres adjacent to the park. There's now a mountaintop, most beautiful views in the park. The family who owned that land decided as they were getting older that they wanted to give it to the park. It's just what they wanted to do with it. They gave it to the park. Not only did they give it to the park, they gave an endowment to help take care of it too. Okefenokee Swamp, the Conservation Fund, which Lawrence Rockefeller started, and now people like Mr. Chenard contribute, and Patagonia contribute a whole lot of money to, just added 8,000 acres to the Okefenokee Swamp. A Republican congressperson from Florida just suggested that they create a park in Florida to preserve all the beautiful freshwater springs in their state. And we can do it. It's been done before. We can do it. It's a lot of money in the world. There's a lot of passion for national parks. We can contact our elected officials. I think if everybody spent 1 hour a year contacting their elected officials about national parks and public lands, we could change the course that's headed in right now. We can volunteer like my wife and I do. You can give generously. Friends groups, foundations are great. History organizations, park partners are great places to give money to preserve. You can encourage philanthropy from your family and friends. You know, rich Uncle George doesn't have to give all the money to his alma mater. You know, maybe you could give 10% to a national park friends group and give the other 90% to Yale. Endowments are great. A lot of friends groups, foundations are creating big endowments that are large enough to hire employees. Government's picky about what money it uses to actually pay for federal workers, but if you have enough money with a friends group and create an endowment, then you're allowed to hire more employees. So you can actually provide the staffing we need so badly in our parks right now. And wills, you know, think about friends groups and foundations and historic associations in your wills, because you'll be dead and you won't miss the money at all. And as the great writer Wallace Stegner said, the national parks were the best idea we ever had. Absolutely democratic, absolutely American. They reflect us at our best rather than our worst. And I threw in this extra photo there, Homer Richards, guy who got booted out of Jenny Lake by Horace Albright there. And the families became lifetime friends. The Albright always looked at Homer whenever they were in town. So people can work together. People can create great things like national parks. So thank you so much.